Well, good afternoon, my friends. I'm Erica Lukes. This is UFO Classified. Click, like, subscribe. And if you are feeling so generous, then become a Patreon and support not only the show, but also my efforts with archiving and preserving a very important history that a lot of people don't want us to preserve because it very clearly shows patterns of behavior. It shows certain people doing specific things decade after decade and cashing in on it. And it also shows a lot of other interesting things. I love this subject. I never get tired of it. And, well, okay, who am I kidding? I have gotten a little tired of it, but that's okay. I just rest up, lock myself in the closet, have a margarita, shake it off, I'm good to go. So it's one of those things. But I wanted to say thank you to all of you who are out there in chat. I want to say, Amy, I love you. Give Dinah a big hug for me. Ken, good to see you. Peter, Scott, all of you, thanks for listening to the show and understanding that UFO Classified is important to all of this. As you know, I'm not one of those people that has 50,000 subscribers. And clearly I should be working towards that because I think the public needs a little help and knowledge when it comes to some of the things going on in the UFO world today. So I hope that each and every one of you can do me a favor and make sure you're sharing information. Peter, I really appreciate the fact that you're promoting my show in different social media groups. That is awesome. So thank you all. This is a collective effort, and I appreciate everything that you guys do. So, on that note, I want to say Phil Leach could not join us tonight. He's got a family, and unfortunately, COVID is making the rounds once again, so we wish all of them the best. But tonight, I have back for the third time my friend, Martin Cannon. And I'm so stoked. And I want to say, Mario, thank you so much for always being here and helping me support the show. And hey, J Bench. So, Martin, the wonderful, fabulous author of The Child Stealers, of my favorite monograph, The Controllers, and somebody that I've been really enjoying getting to know and learning from because you had such an interesting history in the subject, and that history, especially with regard to what happened when you wrote The Controllers, that kind of you decided that you needed to step away, and you're back for the third show. And you look marvelous.
Well, thank you very much, Erica. And this was very much a last-minute thing. I think it feels like only about 45 seconds ago you called me and said that your guest had canceled.
I did.
And I can't say that I have nothing prepared because I did have something that was sort of prepared for last week's program. And we didn't get to it because the conversation just went where it went. And so at least there's something, something there. I'm a little bit afraid that your audience is going to think that I'm the Polonius of the paranormal set.
Never.
Okay.
Never.
The old graybeard who keeps going on and on about the old days. I mean, I don't even know.
Hey, I like the old graybeards because they've got the most information, and I think it's important. Like I said, to understand the history, and to understand that you were interacting with some of the same people that we're interacting with, that now just have a whole new audience and a little different shtick. So that's important for people to know.
Well, thank you. And where to go from here? I was actually a little bit struck by a comment that somebody left the last time, and I think I should address it. Somebody said, does Martin Cannon actually believe in anything paranormal? And that's a fair question. And I am not quite sure how to answer it, because I will say that from an early age, I was much struck by the work of John Keel. I remain an old Fortean in that sense, and I reread his books on a fairly regular basis. Doesn't mean I agree with everything he had to say. I've also been having a marvelous time looking at his old, the John Keel website, and looking at the material from his files. one of these days somebody should look up his girlfriend from those days, Lynn Cato, because they were such a cute couple. You could tell from the letters they were exchanging back and forth.
Right, absolutely.
And that would really give us some insight as to what was happening during the days when he was actually researching Mothman and such. But anyways, I am an old Keelian, and Keelian always said belief is the enemy. And so if somebody asks me whether I believe in the paranormal, the answer would be no. If, on the other hand, if somebody asked me if I disbelieve, no. My attitude is that conclusions come at the end of an investigation, not before, not at the beginning. And everybody seems to put it backwards. Everybody seems to put the conclusions first. I am also, Charlie, please. Oh, my dog again.
It's okay. We like it.
Okay. I am also just of the opinion that so many people are putting the conclusions at the beginning of their investigations because they're a little bit afraid that they're going to die before the investigation is over, that they're never going to reach a conclusion. And my answer to that is, I'm cool with that. I'm fine not knowing, never knowing the answer to, these questions that have been bedeviling me all my life.
Right.
And I don't know how you feel about that, whether, you're comfortable with a state of ignorance.
You know what? I think ignorance is a great thing. At least when it comes to Skinwalker. Just kidding. I think that I have accepted the fact that I will shuffle off this mortal coil, not knowing what this is, and that's fine. I think for me, like I mentioned, when you and I talked, I think last, it's the getting there that is the cool thing. It's the meeting people, it's the having adventures, it's all of these things. And thank you, Scott, very much for the super chat sticker and donation. But it's, I love it. I love that, just exploring things. It's not, I definitely feel like what I know now is kind of taken me aback a little bit and taken a little bit of wonder out of things. And I need to find that sense of wonder and joy again. So...
Well, that's important. And I want everybody to know, because I used to have a bit of a reputation as the skeptic, and I was even skeptical of, these people who are claiming to be victims of MK Ultra and CIA mind control. And I turned out to be, in their eyes, the great Judas, the great Satan, because I was saying, no, you don't have any evidence. We need some, you're making some very, very large claims, and I don't see any, my standards of evidence are not impossibly high, but very often I don't see any. And I'm going to need at least a little bit something I can chew on here. So I had this reputation as being a skeptic, but at the same time, I'm not really. There's a part of me that's still, that, kind of kid who was in the library reading John Keel's books and reading all the books by Vincent Gaddis and Frank Edwards and all those other guys who got a lot of people going back in my generation. And I still recall, going out with my wonderful dog Bella and my old girlfriend and traveling out into the California desert all through the night and listening to Art Bell and, jabbering on about the weirdest damn things. And we laughed hilariously. We thought it was funny, but at the same time, you'd be looking up at the starry sky and wondering, well, what if, that sense of wonder is what really keeps us going, right?
And I think that's so much fun. I mean, it's just, I love being outside and just you look up and there's so much, and every time you go out, you're seeing something new. And I love that. I mean, I definitely believe, I know that what we understand now is not what we are going to know in 100 years. Things advance. And I think that we're foolish to, in a lot of ways, say that there is nothing other than what we know in a black and white world. Because I have had some interesting experiences. I think most people have had something unusual. But my sense of, when I was when I first started having experiences and then learning, okay, I need to put myself in check. This could be something that's mundane. This could be, I need to go through A, B, C, and D. And then when all those things are ruled out, then, if there's something incredible there, then I'm going to hold that to myself and just know that that was something for the memory books.
So, Erica, now's the time for you to fess up. And I will do the same if you go first, okay?
No,
it's
no.
your show, so you have to go first. Have you had any experiences that you found difficult to explain in conventional terms?
Being married to somebody that saw a shape-shifting werewolf.
Yeah. Well,
Your turn.
Well, I dated a famous UFO abductee. I still don't know what to make of that. But, you must have something else. Anything personal that you've witnessed, that you've experienced, you've gone through?
I definitely have had some interesting experiences, yes. And I think that's why I'm here. That's why I still think it's something that I'll, want to look at forever. And that's what I say. I miss that sense of wonder. And I need to kind of get back to that. But, I think there's a good book that we can, about personal experiences. How's that? Deflection. I actually got the playbook from Lou Elizondo, so he taught me some things. Just kidding. Anyway, it's classified. I can't talk about it.
All right. So I guess you've got me to the point where I have to, because when I got into the field, I had all these people hanging around me who were telling, you've never seen a UFO. And I said, no, of course not. And it says, you've seen ghosts or, like all these things. No, of course not. And I don't expect that I ever will. I think that, I'm probably quite resistant to that. I'm just not the kind of person that those things happen to. And people would warn me, the deeper you get into this, strange things will start happening to you. And a few strange things did. First of all, there's the paranoia-inducing things.
Right.
Everybody in the field, I think I may have talked about this before, but just about everybody in the field, especially back in the 90s, had the mail tampering happen. Did I mention that?
You know what? Let's talk about that a little bit, because we've got a question here about, and thank you for the donation, Belinas1, and he wants to know your thoughts on Carla Turner and Leah Haley. Did you ever meet either of them? And I know that Carla Turner was, there was a bit of mail tampering.
Really? Mm-hmm. What was the story with her case?
You know what? Greg Bishop has been on the show before, and I think when they were exchanging information or letters back and forth, both of them had experiences where their mail was tampered with by their account.
Well, I corresponded a bit with Carla Turner, may have spoken with her by voice, but I do recall corresponding with her. I probably was not my best self. Leah Haley, I just don't recall. I know that she has switched over to being a My Labs person. May I use that term? I just want everybody to know that had nothing to do with me. She and I did not, I didn't try to convert her. I'd like to think that I didn't try to convert anybody. Even Krista, God bless her, she stuck to her alien guns, even though she was dating me. And I didn't try to talk her out of it. I didn't try to talk anybody out of their alien experiences, although I'm sure that Bud Hopkins would accuse me of, or John Mack or whoever would accuse me of trying to taint the evidence.
No, let's talk about the mail tampering, but let's just hit on that for a second. Why would they accuse you of that?
Bud was really angry with me. Well, to the extent that he was going to acknowledge my existence. He accused me of being a blanket explainer, somewhat close to Phil Klaas. And my attitude was that this was not the... Erica, could I ask you to talk to the audience for 2 minutes while I...
Yes.
I've got to tend to a dog who is upset because there's a cat right outside the window.
Well, I could hear the cat, and that was kind of a fun exchange there. I'm sure we'll be having one of those exchanges later. The dog's over here. We're waiting for Mufasa. Oh, there's Mufasa over there. He'll be joining us. But I wanted to say, again, Simon, thank you for your comments. Molinas, thank you for the donation. And Scott, thank you, thank you. And Kathy and Amy, I will ask for Whitley Strieber tales. But again, I wanted to take a second to say, while Martin is, entertaining the animals, keeping them in line, which good luck on that one. I want to say thank you. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share information about this show so I can build subscribers and have as many, someday as some of these other shows that really shouldn't have any. Anyway, Martin, welcome back.
Oh my goodness. People wondered for 20 years whatever happened to Martin Cannon. He was hurting animals.
Well, good job. Clearly it paid off.
Mail tampering. That happened to me. And I tried not to be too paranoid about it, but what was really odd in my case is, I think I may have mentioned this before, the mail that got opened was always completely innocuous. It was nonsense. Things that would not matter in the slightest. Whereas whenever I got something that was actually a little bit sensitive, it went through. But yeah, the mail was reached a point where about a good 70% of my mail was just ripped open in the most obscenely obvious way. And sometimes it was, the envelopes were resealed with tape and everything. And sometimes there'd be a little scrawled message that said opened by mistake. So there was some paranoia inducing things that happened like that. And I think I talked about the time I opened the door and I saw a key to my apartment lying on the mat right in front of the door. And it fit my lock, and it definitely wasn't any of the keys that were, in my possession or, in anybody else's possession. It was new. That was disconcerting. And there were a few other things that happened that were a little less explicable. I did have a black-eyed kid experience at one time.
You told us about that.
Yeah.
That was a little creepy.
Well, it was different. In many ways, it was the same as the others. And by the way, this happened in 95. I want to say early 95, maybe. I looked it up. It was either late 94 or early 95. And the way I can be sure, I can go look it up again, is that I was in the Monterey area to research the Paulie Klaas case. Do you remember the disappearance of Paulie Klaas?
Yes, but I think there are people that are younger that might not know what that is. If you could explain.
She was, for a while she was dubbed America's Child. She was kidnapped out of her home in Petaluma, California in 1994. I think towards the beginning of October, and it was a very, very strange case. And a lot of moving parts to the case itself, which I guess I can discuss if I ever, find the notes that I took at the time. And as it happened, I knew a man who lived in the Monterey area who was friends with Joe Klaas, who was Paulie's grandfather. Joe Klaas himself was a rather extraordinary individual. Joe Klaas was the co-writer of a book about Amelia Earhart, which was the great conspiracy book about Amelia Earhart.
Oh, wow.
And Joe Klaas wrote a sequel to that book. And I think I should mention it now, because that was the most fascinating manuscript I think I've ever read. I have no idea if it was on the level. But Joe Klaas's theory was that Amelia Earhart had been captured by the Japanese and had given propaganda broadcasts, had been forced basically to give propaganda broadcasts by the Japanese to American soldiers. In other words, that she was one of a number of women who fulfilled the Tokyo Rose role.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And but she cannot be blamed for that because basically she was held at gunpoint. And that she was on a spying mission, as everybody guessed when they watched that old Rosalind Russell movie that was obviously based on the Amelia Earhart story. And that, hold on one more second. Dog,
This is... Yes, all right. And we will talk about Pascagoula. And I just want to say thanks, you guys. Hey, Sean, how are you? Thanks for paying attention to the show. last week. You guys rock. It's really cool. So, and thanks, Jay Bench. Hit the like, people. This would be good. So
I really wanted to speak to this Joe Class fellow because he had, I had read his the manuscript, the lost manuscript to the sequel to his Amelia Earhart book, and I thought it was the most fascinating thing ever. And Erica, talk to the people. I'm going to put the dog upstairs.
But it's just okay. I'll talk to the people. I'm talking to the people.
I'm so sorry. This is ridiculous.
No. It cracks me up. This is like the best stuff ever. I mean, it's like I always think about the time that my daughter prank called my show when I was doing the radio show, and that was quite special. Or the time that I built this. I'm just kind of going off topic here, but I had first started doing the show when I was trying to build this sound room, which, because I was broadcasting hardwood floors and the echo was terrible and yada yada yada. So I took my art easel and a few chairs and I put a strawberry shortcake blanket over it. If you could imagine, I wish I would have taken a photo of that, but then my cat Lewis, who looks much like Mufasa, came in and climbed up the blanket, and it sounded like a car crashed, and it was just a lovely thing. I wish I still had a copy of that. But anyway, that's me doing the, sound engineering. Strawberry shortcake. So anyway, okay, how's the...
Without the dog to distract me, I am so sorry. I really have not.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
I can explain to people why my interest in the Amelia Earhart case led to my meeting with the black kid. Although even I don't understand exactly how that happened. So I wanted to meet Joe Claas, and I also wanted to write a true crime book about the kidnapping of Paulie Klaas. Her body had just been found, and I was going to go with my friend. His name was Bob DeFord, and I was going to go up with Bob to the area where the body was found, and to the area where the murderer, basically, he was convicted, Rodney Allen Davis, as I recall his name was. I went to the Indian reservation where he lived. He was not himself a member of, I think, the Pomo Indian tribe, but he lived on this reservation, and he was there, a very notorious character. And that was an eerie sight. So I'm there deciding, trying to write my first true crime book. But before we go out and do the research, I spend the night with another friend of mine. His name is Al Kunzer. And Al was, I guess I should say, Al was the keeper of the Mae Brussel legacy. Mae Brussel was the queen of the conspiracy theorists in the 1980s and before that in the 1970s. She was one of the few left-wing conspiracy theorists before it was completely taken over by the right-wingers. And she was quite a character in her own right. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that if I had known her while she was... Now I have a cat who's trying to get in on the action.
Oh, cute. Now we just need to get Amy on here.
All right. Anyways, so she was... Al basically kept all of her audio tapes. And to this day, if you go online and you try to buy the audio tapes of all of Mae Brussel's broadcasts, they were ones that come from Al Kunzer's collection. I have to tell you all of that because when I was in Monterey, usually I slept on Al's couch. We were good friends. And and he was so comfortable with having me around that he allowed me to just hang out in his living room and, read his wonderful library and, lay out on his extremely comfortable sofa and read books while he went out to a play that night. He and his lady, Marian, went out to a play that night when about 9:30 or so, maybe 10 o'clock, I heard a knock on the door. Oh God, I'm so embarrassed having to tell this story. Now,
no, but you know what? But I mean, I think you mentioned a little bit about this last time we talked.
I did I mention this story?
I think so.
I heard a knock on the door, and well, okay, if I've come clean with it before, I can tell a fuller story now. And there was a child. Through looking through the peephole, there was a young. He looked to be a very small child, but when I opened the door, he was like 15, 16 years old, and he before he had opened the door, I had asked, what is it? What do you need? And he gave me the impression that something was, somebody was hurt outside. And I think I did tell you this story before. And so I opened it up and, wondering, let me go outside. Let me see what's happened. And he said, he suddenly changed his story and he just said, no, I got to use the telephone. I have to use the telephone. And he had this weird, gruff voice, like it was coming from another world, and he looked, even though he was young, he also looked a little bit like an animated corpse, like he was dead. But, and it was just like those stories that you've read about with all the other black eyed kids.
Okay, I just made a great comment and my mic was muted.
Oh, sorry.
Never mind.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I think I dated a couple people that looked like that in high school.
My.
Or last year. Just kidding. Okay, anyway. Continue. Sorry.
Well, anyways, he wanted to use the phone. And of course, the phone in that particular house was located right next to Al's collection of Mae Brussel tapes, which he considered absolutely holy. And I couldn't let him get anywhere near that. So I said, I'm sorry, you can't come in, but I'll go outside. I'll make a call to the cops for you. And he said, no, I just wanted to come in. And, it was like, and it was eventually along the lines that I saw that he had, the thing with the eyes, which was very, very strange. And when that conversation finally ended and I closed the door on him and I thought, well, they warned me at the beginning that I was going to experience something supernatural before this whole journey was over. And well, it just happened. So how do I feel about it now? Al came home and and I told him the story. And of course, his first reaction was, you didn't let him anywhere near the tapes. And I said, no. He didn't care about the eyes. That was, I'm sure if you were to corral him now, he'd forgot about that. He would tell you this, but that he was very concerned about protecting those tapes.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So at the time, I thought somebody was playing a trick on me.
Yes, and I remember you were talking about who you thought was playing a trick on you.
Right. So did I talk about the Wendy story very much?
You did, yeah. You did touch on that.
Oh, goodness.
That was a strange one.
Because I've told that story to a few times, and I didn't remember whether I told it to you. I am so sorry about that.
No. I think it was fascinating. I mean, that was...
Well, did I mention that Wendy was basically, that... what does Jacques Vallée call her in in Forbidden Science?
Triumph?
La belle hybride avec les yeux noirs. The beautiful hybrid with the black eyes. Mm-hmm. Because when she wanted to play a trick on Ralph Steiner, she wore contact lenses which blacked out the whites of her eyes, and she was pretending that she was an alien hybrid. So I thought, this is Wendy. Because I had met her and she was the kind of girl who could pose as a boy. Oh yeah, I did tell you that. So that is basically the one time when I had an arguably paranormal experience. And since I did tell that story before, I can tell you, I guess I should mention the one other time, although this is really embarrassing. This is, if I didn't already have rosacea, this really would turn my face red. Ever since I was a very young man, like 14 or so, I had a terrible crush on a woman who died long before I was born. I'm not religious, but I had a crush on Bernadette Subaru, the visionary of Lourdes. I don't know why. I had seen the movie, Song of Bernadette, when I was a little bit younger than that. And then I saw her face, the photographs were taken when she was sweet 16. And I thought, oh, that is the most beautiful girl. I was just starting to notice girls, And she had that, the round face and the completely clear skin and, just the little wisps of brown hair, which you could sometimes see in certain photographs. And I thought that she was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. And to this day, I still think that. Well, I've had a lot of crushes since then. They come and go like every, especially back when I was that age. I had a new crush every few days. But Bernadette was always somebody that I thought was particularly beautiful. And so I tell you that story because I was once going to write a book about Marian apparitions. I had gotten, this would be about 10 years ago. I had gotten so sick of the UFO buffs, and I had really gotten sick of all, the conspiracy buffs. I was dabbling in politics, and then I decided, politics is important and we have to pay attention to it no matter whether you're on the right and the left. You've got to get in there and you got to do your part and stand up for what you believe in. But in the end, it just drains you, and it just leads to division and horror. And I had always had something of an interest in Marian apparitions. And I wanted to write the first book looking at it from not an anti-religious perspective, but from a Fortean perspective. And so I was going to write about all of them, including there's a whole bunch of stories that most people don't even know anything about. The apparition of Kibeo in Rwanda, which supposedly predicted the great massacre that occurred about 8 years later. There was an extraordinary controversial event that happened in Tilly-sur-Seulles, which was a small French town, pretty much exactly where the Normandy landing happened. But in the early part of the 20th century, I think 1902 or something like that, really, really weird things were happening there. So I was collecting all these stories, and I was going to write a book. And eventually I had a terrible hard drive crash, and I took that as a sign that, well, maybe that book was never meant to be. But while I was hot and heavy writing that book, I had a dream. Normally, I know people telling dreams, that's not a very interesting thing, no matter how strange the dream is. But this one may be a little bit interesting. I had a dream that I was teaching a class about this book that I had already written this book about Marian apparitions, and I was teaching a class, and somebody asked me, ultimately, did I think that any of these apparition stories have any evidence to back them? And I had to say, no, I don't think that any of them are veridical. Because the evidence isn't there. And somebody asked, and again, this is a dream, but in this class, somebody asked me, well, what would you consider evidence? And I said, well, if I had a vision of the Virgin Mary, I would ask her to say a few words in Aramaic. That seems logical. I would ask her to talk in a language that I did not know and that very few people knew. And then we could have those words translated, and we would understand whether this was, that this was something that could be proven. That would constitute a reasonable degree of evidence and it's never been done. There have been hundreds and hundreds of Marian apparition cases, and nobody ever asks her to speak in a language other than the one spoken by the visionary. Which is one reason why I'm, fascinated by these cases, but also a skeptic regarding these cases. Mm-hmm. So who should stand up in this class but Bernadette? I had a dream about Bernadette, and there she was, and she was very small because that's the way she was in real life, and she was dressed in black, but not in a nun's habit. And I asked her to say, well, how would you? She basically said, what kind of proof would you require of me? And I said, I don't know. You could speak to me in your language, because I did not know her language. Now, I know a little French. I used to be pretty good in French. I used to have a reading knowledge of French. It dissipates. It's use it or lose it, right? But I still know a little bit of French. But she did not speak French. And this is one thing that people don't understand about the case. She spoke Occitan, mm-hmm. which at the time was considered a dialect of French, but which is now considered to be a completely separate Romance language. And at that time, I knew nothing about Occitan.
Ooh.
Now, she would have called it not Occitan, but I think Béarnais, the language, because Béarn is a town not too far away from Lourdes, mm-hmm. and it's where they make the sauce. Mm-hmm. And so they called that, that was the name of the language in her part of the world at that time.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's a different language. It has a different, many of the words are the same, but it also has a different structure, like, the suffixes act as adjectives. And it even has different letters of the alphabet added to the normal alphabet used in French. And so I didn't even realize how different the language was. So she spoke to me a sentence in Occitan. And I can't say it to you because it was personal. It was also a little bit rude. So oh yes, well, if you get into the lore of Marian apparitions, it's very important that we speak about that secrets. We have to keep the secrets. So I'm going to consider that message to be a secret.
Okay.
But I will say this: the message just stuck in my head, even after I woke up. I didn't have to write it down. I saw it, all the letters as if they were completely spelled out, and I remembered it. And I did not know any Occitan at that time. But I looked it up. It made sense. The verb in that sentence was different from the cognate verb in French, and it was perfectly conjugated. So it was accurate. Does that count as a mystic experience?
Well, I mean, I had a dream about John Alexander, and which, and George W. Bush, and just to be, throw this out there, and please, this is coming from my mind, but I did have a dream that has always stuck with me, and I was, shouldn't ever repeat this. This should be an inside voice, but I was talking on a payphone, and I looked up, and the clouds were parting, and beautiful red sky, and this really good-looking long-haired guy came towards me and said, "Hey, I like you. Do you want to go on a date?" And he said, if my dad doesn't like you, he's going to kill you. Well, I think it was, probably Jesus. It was.
I like you. Do you want to go on a date?
I can't make this up. I don't know what it means if you were to analyze me. I mean, I'm sure.
No, I'm kind of curious. Does that ever work in real life?
I don't think so. No, but I think if you analyzed my dreams, the John Alexander dream, and oh my gosh, and I know Ken's like, I thought it would have been William Shatner. No, Shatner has never graced me in his dreams, but John Alexander has, and George W. Bush. I had a little romantic dream about George W. Bush, which...
Okay, explain, please.
Well, I mean, it was just one of those, dreams. It's like, oh, he is so cute, and I'm not saying it's right. And I'm saying, I can't believe I'm admitting this, but it's like one of those things you wake up and you're like, George W. Anyway.
Okay, that may not be a mystical
TMI.
experience.
Well, no,
it's revelatory.
It is. It clearly, yeah. Anyway, thank you. I'm glad the whole world knows about that. It's a fun one, but there you go.
Oh, that's okay. I came clean about mine, and so it's okay for you to come clean about yours.
That is true. Turnabout is fair play. And so I just want to kind of focus things again, because people have been wanting to know about Pascagoula.
I was just going to bring that up because I suddenly recalled that that came up at the end of the last show. And I suppose I have to talk about that. All right. Tommy Blant was the first investigator on the scene when the Pascagoula happened in, what was it, 72, 73? I don't really have to give any background on the case, right? I mean,
no, it's okay. I think people here know.
Yeah, we're beyond that.
So, yep.
And it was Calvin Hickson and Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. I grew up in a jazz family, so I really, really want to say Charlie Parker, but it wasn't that. It was, and Hickson was the younger guy. Parker, I believe, was the older guy. And Hickson was the one, I believe, who recently wrote a book about it, which includes a marvelous collection of news clippings from back in the day, and I strongly recommend anybody to get that. I also the earlier book by a guy named Mendez. Definitely, you should try to find that about the Pascagoula case. But the very first investigator on the scene was Tommy Bland. I used to be friends with Tommy. kind of a strange cat, but we all were, right? Everybody connected with this field is kind of a strange fellow. In his case, he was very religious, a Southern good old boy, very, very smart. I don't want to put him down or anything like that. Just really quite brilliant in his own way. And but when you got him onto the religious side, it was one of those things where I'd be talking on the phone with him, and the moment he mentioned JC or anything like that, I'd have to hold the phone like, and then when I sensed that all was safe, I could bring it back, and I said, "Okay, Tommy, let's get back to what we were talking about." So it was to some degree, it was kind of a bumpy relationship I had with him, but he was an old school researcher, and he knew everybody. He knew J. Allen Hynek very well. He also believed the stories that were going around, that have lately been going around about J. Allen Hynek, being deliberately part of the effort to sort of disinform Paul Benowitz. A lot of people have said, no, J. Allen would never have done that. But Tommy thought so. Tommy was, he was the kind of person where he really admired and he liked J. Allen Hynek, but at the same time, a little bit suspicious of him. There was, Hynek would apparently drop hints that he had an agenda, something was going on. So, but Tommy was operating on his own with a, oh God, who was that? He would get stories published by this fellow named, I want to say Hayden Hughes or something like that. He was another really scurrilous UFO promoter, and he ran cheesy magazines devoted to the subject. Okay. Basically, he was Timothy Green Beckley.
Okay.
Before Beckley was Beckley,
Okay.
Or he was another Timothy Green Beckley. And Tommy was really regretful that he ever had anything to do with that operation. But this fellow did publish Tommy, so Tommy was willing to go, use that as an excuse to go into the field and do research. And he talked to Hickson and Parker, and so he interviewed them, and he said, "What was in the middle of this interview?" Tommy said, "What was the thing that you last remember before the experience began?" And Hickson, the younger guy, said, "I heard this zip in the air." I said, "What happened directly after the zip in the air?" Or Tommy said, "What happened directly after the zip in the air?" He said, "I felt something sting me in my arm." Well, it turns out he had a wound in his arm. And this is in, the book that recently came out. Tommy photographed this. And if you can find the, that cheesy, I think it was UFO something. I used to have a copy of it, but it was that really cheesy UFO magazine that Hughes put out. You can actually see the photograph that Tommy took. It was definitely a wound, because this is the day after it happened, and it's a red mark right on the arm. There may be, Hickson may have a copy of this photograph as well. So that's really unusual that he heard like zip, and then he stung here, and then he's out like a light, and then he has this experience, which seems to take place in an altered state of consciousness. So Tommy took note of that. That was his first clue that something was going on here that didn't have anything to do with aliens. And then he spoke to the witness. The witness was the drawbridge operator. Now, back in the day, when I got this story from Tommy Bland, I tried my best. I used to have this drawbridge operator's name, and I tried my best to track him down. But remember, this was before the internet. It wasn't so easy to track people down back then. I remember talking to the fellow who was in charge of MUFON in that part of the world, or what do you call them? The state section head or
state director? Yeah,
state director, right? And he remembered this fellow, but he didn't have any contact information. Now, according to Tommy, I have not read this anywhere else. I got this from one source, and I'm naming my source. And if he's wrong, well, you can look him up. He's in Panama City these days. I have not spoken to the man in 20 years. But I trusted him. Like I said, Tommy and I had our differences, but I trust him. He wouldn't make up a story like this. And he said that he spoke to this drawbridge operator because if you look up the spot where the alleged abduction happened, it was definitely within line of sight of that drawbridge. And Tommy spoke to the guy and said, you had to have seen something. This spaceship landing from the, it's because it's right over there. You should be able to see it. And the drawbridge operator said, no, I didn't see any spaceship. What I saw was a car pull up and two guys with flashlights come out. And I didn't really pay much attention to it, but I thought it was a little bit weird, because as it's, this kind of seedy, trashy area where, Hickson and Parker like to go fishing. But right by the side of the river, and the drawbridge operator couldn't understand why these guys came out of their car with flashlights and were approaching Hickson and Parker. Now, the drawbridge operator did not see anything after that. It's not like he saw, Hickson and Parker keel over unconscious, and he didn't see them being dragged away by a team or anything like that. No. But he did see two guys with flashlights come out. And that's the story that Tommy told me. So we've got the zip through the air and Hickson feeling a sting on his arm. We've got a wound that was photographed. And we've got two guys we've got a third party, a witness from a distance, who saw two men, a car drive up to that location, turn off its headlights, and two guys with flashlights come out. Now, can I point to all of that and say, this is proof of the controller's theory? No, I don't make that pretense. Because I was never able to contact the drawbridge operator myself. And I tried my best with the limited information available to me at that time. And I guess the reason I'm telling the story now is I'm sure that fellow is probably no longer with us. Or if he is, he's very elderly. But he may have told his story to family members. And there may be somebody out there who is sufficiently interested in all of this to check for themselves. Because who knows, maybe if we start kicking over a few stones, we'll be able to find some information that will be able to confirm or deep six the story that Tommy Bland told me. So that's it. I basically tend to believe what Tommy told me. But on the other hand, I recognize there's a difference between my personal belief or my personal leanings. Let's not use so grand a word as belief. And that which I can prove. This is not evidence that I can take into court. It is sufficient evidence for us to do further investigation. Right. So maybe that's all we ever get.
So Blaine is asking a question. What would the motivation be for targeting those particular people?
That I do not know.
And that would be interesting because that's a case that I have not really looked into that much. There's so many other areas of interest that I've had, but that would be interesting to look at their backgrounds and find out a little bit more about that.
Now, there was a shipyard nearby that was run by Lytton. And I know that they were, that they were building basically underwater submersible craft. Drones basically that went under the water rather than, in the air, which we know nowadays. Is it possible that Hickson and Parker saw something they should not have seen? I should think, yeah, that's possible, but it's pure blue sky conjecture on my part. Is it possible that, you would do such a thing simply to prove that you can do it? And then once you have the techniques perfected, you can use it, where it really counts out in the field. You can make somebody, who's somebody you want to discredit, tell a UFO story that, that is inherently unbelievable. That's possible.
I mean, it's interesting, and I just had somebody, John, tune into the chat or the show, and he just said it. He just tuned in. Is he saying or implying that they made up the UFO abduction story? And I think you're just saying that there are different possibilities.
Oh, I don't think for a second
So,
that Hickson and Parker made anything up. Those two guys seem credible to me. They seem, you read the news coverage at the time. They seemed credible to the cops. They were recorded talking to each other, secretly recorded while they were in the cell, and they were animated and excited and a little bit scared by all the things that they had seen and all the things that they had witnessed. So we're left in a position where we have to ask ourselves, let us stipulate at least their credibility. Let us admit that it's a case with two witnesses. Therefore, it's not as easy to dismiss it. I mean, you could, there's this highfalutin term, folie à deux, but for a number of reasons, I just don't think that's what's going on here. No, I believe that they are credible, that they are testifying to something that they testified to something that they absolutely witnessed. Now, my question has always been: did somebody tamper with their perceptions? Because the controller's hypothesis was always about that. When I wrote the thing, my intention was never to denigrate the witnesses. I was looking for a way to stipulate that the witnesses were honest people and telling the truth as they knew it, but that that their memories have been skewed, that their perceptions have been skewed, that they had been basically sent into an altered state of consciousness, and therefore the things that they reported were not things that actually happened to them, but nevertheless that they are honest witnesses.
thank you. I mean, and I think that's, in perceptions, could somebody be playing with somebody's perceptions? I mean, I think that's, you look at the people that have been involved in the UFO subject since, the late 40s, and what are we looking at? People that are involved with psychological warfare, people that are involved with non-lethal technology. It's so why in the world wouldn't we be asking those questions? And that's not, like you said, that's not to discredit a witness. That's to throw things out there that potentially could be happening.
Well, yeah. I mean, for example, there's this whole side to the Whitley Strieber saga, which nobody, well, I guess a few people are talking about it now because Peter Levenda talked about it. And I'm afraid the reason why Peter Levenda is talking about it is because I mentioned it to him. And Levenda is Levenda, so naturally he's decided to go public, even though I had talked about, mentioned it to him in private. But an earlier incarnation of myself, in the older days, I was far too trusting. I'm not anti-Levenda, I should say. I've really quite enjoyed his books. I haven't believed a lot of what he said, but he's a very good writer, and he has some fascinating things to say. And and for those of you who know about Peter Levenda and know his story, yes, it's obvious to me that he's the writer of the Simon Necronomicon. I don't know why he hasn't fessed up to that.
Well, go into that like a little bit, because I think everybody knows it, but there are new people listening. So just give a little spiel on that.
Well, Peter Levenda is another French writer who has been around for a long, long time now. And he has long been rumored to be the writer of a little black paperback called the Necronomicon, which was supposedly the book that was referenced in the works of H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft wrote all these horror stories about the Cthulhu mythos, and there was also this book called the Necronomicon, which was a book of terrible evil spells where you could wreak havoc on the world, written by the Mad Arab. And over time, H.P. Lovecraft fans, you might say, they tried to convince themselves that the Necronomicon was a real book. Mm-hmm. And so at some point in the 1970s, it behooved people to try to come up with the real, quote unquote, Necronomicon. In other words, somebody came out with a paperback book labeled the Necronomicon, which supposedly was this collection of spells that you could do at home in order to summon up demons and so forth. And it was allegedly based on ancient Near Eastern magic, but it was clearly ill-researched along those lines. We had some names of some ancient Near Eastern deities and so forth, but it never really made sense. More than likely, it was actually inspired by other grimoires that have been floating around since the since the 19th century, or well, quite a bit earlier than that. I'm thinking of the Book of Black Magic, which Arthur Waite came out with in I think in the 1890s. A lot of that was showing up in this volume called the Necronomicon. It was sold in stores, and it was a huge seller. And a lot of people believe that it was the real thing, that H.P. Lovecraft was referring to this book. No, it wasn't. H.P. Lovecraft didn't believe in the occult. He wrote about it because it was good fodder for horror stories, but he didn't believe in any of this stuff. And so the question was, who really did put this together? It apparently was put together by a bunch of a group of occultists who were coagulated around us, an occult bookstore in New York City called The Magical Child. One of the people who was part of this group was a fellow by the name of Chris Claremont. He is best known to a lot of people as the writer of the X-Men comic book. He didn't invent the X-Men, but he kind of invented the new X-Men, all the characters that you saw in the movies. That, he's the guy who started all of that. So, but he had the secret side where he was interested in this woo-woo stuff. And another person who was apparently involved in that group, or so I've heard, was Peter Levenda. And I have heard that when the Necronomicon, this paperback book, became a bestseller, Peter Levenda was the one who got the royalty checks. But to this day, Peter insists that no, it wasn't him. And he has this whole elaborate story about how he received the manuscript, but didn't photograph it, and didn't photocopy it, didn't do anything that would actually provide any evidence of it, but that he simply transcribed it or whatever. And there's a lot more to this story. You can find some podcasts where Peter talks about that. He should be heard out. His side of the story deserves an airing. At the same time, I have a perfect right to say hogwash. I think he made it all up himself.
Well, it's interesting to sit here and read all the comments and chat. And I wanted to say, again, I love the people that get in here every week and to ask very questions. I mean, they understand the topic and they understand what you're talking about with Peter Levenda. And V just said that it isn't a rumor, that it has been confirmed that it was Peter that wrote Necronomicon, but unless he created that myth. But I mean, how fascinating. And he also did, the book on Joseph Smith and the Mormons.
That's a good book.
And
yeah.
So, and then, who could forget Secret Machines and all sorts of things. So he is quite a fascinating figure. It would be interesting to interview him sometime. But again, what is his intention other than maybe making money?
He wrote a book about Joseph Smith and the magical underside of, early Mormonism. And I think he wrote that because he expected Mitt Romney to win the election. And he didn't. But it would have been a huge seller if Mitt had won and we had had a Mormon in the White House.
But then you look at, and I'm wondering what time frame he actually wrote the book. I'll have to look that up. But I mean, where was Harry Reid in all of this? Where was Joe Firmage? Where was the Mormon connection in all of this when he wrote that? Because it's funny now when you look at some of the people involved now in all of this who own specific ranches and things and their long-term connections with things. I mean, it's like, is Peter Levenda just promoting that narrative that new people are trying to glom onto?
I don't know. I can tell you this, that when it comes to the stuff that he's been saying about Whitley Strieber, And he's gotten on Strieber's program, and they've talked about it back and forth. He doesn't quite say where he gets his information. Folks, he got it from me. I'll tell you how. Was at the time when I was researching the controllers, and I was going to turn the monograph into a proper book. I was contacted by a fellow named Ed Conroy. Maybe some of your listeners will remember who he was or is. He was Whitley Strieber's biographer. He wrote a book called Report on Communion, which is very good. And Ed was a wonderful fellow. We talked on the phone, not a lot, but for some hours. And there are aspects of Report on Communion which tell kind of a different story about Whitley Strieber than you will find in any of his books. And I can't pretend to have read all of them, because I did kind of drop out of ufology, and I understand that some of the more recent ones have gotten into very strange areas. But Ed contacted me, and because I had been asking about these things, like his Strieber's fathers, his political connections and so forth. And this was odd. Whitley Strieber just wasn't a kid growing up in Texas. There was he was kind of, his family was kind of tuned in, so it was kind of odd that that this fellow would later go on to be the world's most famous UFO abductee. And so I was asking Ed about that, and apparently behind the scenes, Ed was talking to Whitley Strieber, and Whitley decided that he was going to come clean with me, at least via email, or at least start hinting with me about things to me. And so yeah, it was all set up that I had to talk with Whitley via email, and it was this elaborate security mechanism. That was my first experience with PGP, that thing where they encrypt your emails so that nobody could, and I was like, come on, this is going a little bit too far. Just give me a call and we'll talk this over on the phone,
But it's so mysterious, though,
Yeah, and this was right after I'd gotten my first internet-capable computer. So I guess we're talking 95. Mm-hmm. But Whitley finally contacted me, and he started to tell this very strange story. And I kept it to myself all these years. And then when I left the field, I didn't want the information to die with me, so I confided in only one person. I don't know why it was Peter Levenda. I mean, okay, we're all allowed to have a few stupid choices, right? Not that Peter's
not me.
Not that Peter's a bad guy or anything. It's just that he and I weren't close. We had corresponded a bit. And I thought, well, and I remember, I guess it was just because I had read one of his books, and I thought, this is well written. So I thought, just because he's a good writer, I'm going to confide in him, because I don't want, what if, Strieber should die tomorrow and I should die the next day, and this information disappears forever. So, I don't want it to disappear forever. I want somebody to have it, somebody to be able to do some follow-up research. And so I picked Peter Levenda. He was, the information was that, well, I guess the most important story was that when Whitley Strieber was a young man, he was asked to participate in these really, really weird classes, quote unquote, at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas, and that he couldn't remember what happened to him during these classes. Something about these classes had a connection to, oh my God, it was a name I was, Strugholz, Heinz Strugholz. He was a Nazi scientist who was brought over as part of Project Paperclip. And I could never get a straight story out of Whitley Strieber as to what Strugholz had to do with this. And I wanted to ask Strieber, now what happened during these classes? You say that you remember sitting there in a room and like at a desk with other people around, and that suddenly you would black out, or you wouldn't remember what happened afterwards. And it reached a point where Whitley wouldn't talk to me anymore. But I thought this was fascinating. I thought Whitley Strieber was targeted long before he had his experiences that he wrote about in the book Communion. Not only that, he and his friend were approached by the agency. And this is a story that I don't think even Peter has. Oh, what the hell, since we're kind of, we're kind of into the deep end right now, I might as well tell something that I have never revealed in public before. And Strieber might be a little bit incensed that I'm doing this, but I think the man is no longer alive, and so I will. Strieber grew up with a friend named Christopher Wren. Yes, it is the same name as a famous British architect. Mm-hmm. No, it's not the same guy. Christopher Wren later went on to become a journalist. He wrote for the Washington Post and for other venues. And he was, in the late 70s, he was basically the Washington Post's correspondent in Moscow. He was their man in the USSR. Okay. The USSR, I've even seen a Soviet publication which fingered this fellow Wren. They said that he was CIA, that he was just there as under journalistic cover. Basically, the impression I got from Strieber was, yeah, that was it. In other words, he was really doing journalism when he was there in Moscow, but he also had an agenda. I know that in his later writings, Wren has kind of hinted that this was the case, that the accusations against him by the USSR weren't just propaganda, that that he really was one of those journalists who had an agency connection. So suddenly, Whitley Strieber becomes this really interesting individual, an even more interesting individual, I should say. Not only is he a very gifted writer, not only is he the most famous UFO abductee of all time, but long before that, he had a friend who was invited to join the agency. My understanding was that Whitley himself was invited and that he said no. And I hope I'm remembering that correctly. I also remember another story. And again, it's been a long time since I even thought about this. So, and I know I'm definitely telling stories out of school right now. But like I said, in for a penny, in for a pound. Since Lavinda came out with his, it just started getting blabby with everything that he knows, or that is to say, with everything that I told him, then I might as well tell the rest of the story. One of Whitley Strieber's first, if not his first exercise in fiction, was a book called Black Magic. And despite the title, it's a spy book. I remember being told, I think by Whitley Strieber himself, that he had been asked by people in the government to include a page that was not written by him. One of the characters in this book was going to start going on and on about some secret program. And basically the idea is that they were trying to convince the other side. They had this, or rather I should say, they had this whole counterintelligence scheme whereby they wanted to convince, the intelligence agencies of the Eastern Bloc that this page in this book contained real information. And since Whitley Strieber was friends with Christopher Wren, whom the Soviets had fingered as an actual CIA agent, it kind of makes sense why they would believe that story. And I was told that Whitley Strieber said, no, I don't want to do that. And they said, are you sure? Because if you do that, we will make sure that your first book is reviewed by the very, very best, that you are going to be publicized. You wonder how to make it as a writer in America? That's one way to make it. There are people out there who can make a thing like that happen, who can make sure that you get the best reviews from the best reviewers, and that there's a lot of light shown on your otherwise easy to ignore book. And Strieber's story was, I said no, that I was going to make it on my own steam. Well, I believe him. And I believe that he did make it on his own steam because he was a very good writer. And I mean, you know, he still is, obviously. And he later books of his were picked up by Hollywood. We all know about Wolfen and
Right. I loved that. Was such a great book.
yeah. And he wrote a later book called Unholy Fire, which I remember liking a great deal, wishing that Hollywood would find that one. But no. Sorry about that. So that's an interesting story. Why aren't stories like that allowed to be told in, by... I was getting into trouble when I focused on stories like that, but I thought they were important. No, I don't think that we can point to those as definite proof that the controller's hypothesis is real. But on the other hand, why do we ignore them? Why should we?
You know, and that's exactly it. And I wanted to say that Mary Grace Kirby has been mentioning in chat that Whitley's talked about some of these things, but you know, of course, I don't subscribe to his show or anything. But he was always a very interesting figure to me, and I remember when Communion came out, or Intruders, or things like that. That was, you know, I was a teenager, or maybe a little bit younger. I was in grade school, but you know, so those were, you know, you look at the eyes. I mean, that was such an iconic figure that really kind of imprinted itself into the public, and it's just fascinating. He's a very fascinating figure, and in that I think the connection with the military is interesting as well. So,
do you think that Strieber actually broke through to to the wider public consciousness because his story was so different from other abduction stories? Or do you think it was just simply because he was a well-known figure beforehand and he was very erudite?
You know, that, and I mean, Amy just mentioned in chat, Amy Collins, that he had a $700,000 advance to write Communion.
Well, yes, but in fact, I had heard that it was more. But on the other hand, as a writer, he had reached that stance. He was getting that kind of money for his fiction books. So why shouldn't he get that kind of money for Communion, which some people consider to be a fiction book? I am not among them. Now, I have to say, I met Strieber once. It was at some dumbass UFO conference in Santa Monica. I don't even know.
Tell us how you really feel.
What?
Tell us how you really feel.
I don't know. I was getting a little bit irritated with the scene by that point. And it was a bad time in my life. I was, especially when I was around UFO buffs, I was very, very short-tempered. And sometimes, when I express my anger in ways that I'm not so proud of now, I would just fly off the handle at people who were telling me stories that I didn't believe, or who expected me to believe things that were just, again, I was always like, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? And even when they were telling me things that were, congruent with the controllers, I would say, no. You can't just presume, you can't just make a claim. We have to have some evidence that we can go on here.
Well, no wonder you were, held in such high regard. No, just kidding. No wonder you were shunned.
Yeah. But I did meet Whitley at one of these things, and he invited me to have lunch with him, a few other people, and his wife. And I want to say a few words here about his wife, Ann Strieber, the late Ann Strieber. She was wonderful. She was a wonderful person, and I really think that she added a lot more to those books and to what was going on in Whitley Strieber's work and in his life in those days than most people realize. She made Whitley made a very good impression on me. I mean, I know that it's very fashionable in some circles for intellectuals to just sneer at the guy, but I liked him a great deal. But I especially liked Anne. She was, how somebody could stay so commonsensical while staying married to Whitley Strieber and dealing with all of these UFO abductees and all of these odd individuals. I'll never know. I mean, that crowd kind of drove me up the wall, and she just maintained her calmness and imperturbability. And, I remember her very fondly.
And so what are your, so you, I mean, you believe his story?
Belief is the enemy. I don't know what to believe. If Strieber were here, I would tell him directly, I don't know what to believe. I don't think he's a liar. There has to be some ground between saying Whitley Strieber is a liar and yes, he actually saw the figures who were depicted on the cover of Communion. There has to be a land in between. As soon as I discover that terrain, I will pitch my tent there. The controller's hypothesis is one way to try to find a land in between, but it's not the only in between. It's not the only possibility. I know that Whitley Strieber was intrigued by that hypothesis, but at the same time, he didn't want to be tied down to it, and I can perfectly understand that. So if that's the reason why he suddenly broke off communication with me, just as it was getting good, then I understand. And I know that he has spoken about it with Peter Levenda. I wish that communication had brought out more details. Maybe somebody could ask him more about Christopher Wren and the back and forth there. Don't you think it is interesting that the world's most famous UFO abductee had a boyhood friend who was recruited by the agency? That's got to mean something.
Well, I think it is interesting that they run in, a pack. Wolfen. So I mean, was he a part of, or did he have any involvement with the Esalen Institute?
Oh, you asked me about Esalen before, and all I could tell you was my personal experience. I don't know. I was always wary about Esalen. Like I said, it's a great place to hang out in a hot bath, like at 2:00 in the morning, and watch the most wonderful scenery you've ever seen in your life. Try to do that at a time when you don't have to pay for it. But the crowd that hung around there, the advanced thinkers, you know more about it than I do, but I was always wary about them. Even the stories that Bob DeFord used to tell me about that place, I was like, yeah, I don't know.
Like what?
It's just like a seeker is born every minute. It's exactly what everybody else knows, that there were all these, kind of well-off individuals would come there and hear these lectures by New Agers and metaphysicians, and a lot of it sounded like garbage to me. I had friends who used to pronounce the word New Age or the term New Age so that it sounded it was a homonym with sewage, like newage and sewage, because it just seems so trite and so unprovable. Well, that was true back in the 80s. It was true back in the 90s. And it's kind of the truth. I still feel that way. Despite my great love for all things Fortean, and despite the fact that I really, really want to find some way to say to the, to the experiencers, to the people who've had these sightings and so forth, that I believe you. I believe you saw something. But at the same time, you know what people say in that world. And there is a great overlap with the John Alexanders and the Hal Putos and that whole Invisible College set. I don't know what that means, but I'm wary of it. What do you think?
I think it's the same group of people, and I think that there's a lot of money to be made. I think there are a lot of minds to influence, and I think that now with the involvement, like we mentioned last week, of of people that started PayPal and whatnot. I think that I think that's an interesting road that people are going down, and for me to have all of these researchers, or the new fabulous hot rock stars in the field, and to have them all speaking at a conference that's funded by a certain person, I think that and nobody's asking questions as to why Peter Thiel is, I'll just, I hate to keep harping on this, but why in the world is somebody like that funding this group of people? And the people that are speaking at the conferences, why aren't they asking him about why he is supporting white supremacists, why he is speaking to and garnering support from groups like that? I think that's really shameful on and everyone that is speaking at those conferences parts, in my opinion. And that should raise questions to their integrity.
Peter Thiel, no, I don't mind saying the name Peter Thiel. I don't think, I am no respecter of Voldemort's name. And he, as far as I'm concerned, he is the Voldemort of the present generation. What particularly bothers me about Peter Thiel is that he has a reputation as a staunch libertarian. He may have been a libertarian at one time, and perhaps on some level he still, he still identifies that way. But that's not what he is. That's the position he'll retreat to if he is challenged, if people start, questioning him too deeply. Peter Thiel is not a libertarian. Peter Thiel wants to return to a pre-capitalist state he wants feudalism, and he wants to be the guy in charge. You should research his little buddy, Mincius Moldbug. He believes in monarchy. He comes right out and says it.
Who is that?
That is his one of his associates, who is a prominent thinker in dark enlightenment circles. Mm-hmm. Perhaps one day you and I can speak, when I've done some, refreshed my own research into that, we can speak about that. Mincius Moldbug, that's his nom de net. I forget what his, Yarvin. Yeah, is his last name. But he is the great philosopher of a return to monarchy, a return to feudalism. And that's what people like Peter Thiel really, really want. Make no mistake about that. Now, I don't know how that fact coalesces with his funding of ufological nonsense. Or maybe it's not nonsense. Or maybe Peter Thiel's interest in ufology is completely unrelated.
No.
But it's disturbing.
No, I mean, for anybody to say that it's unrelated, and I like you throwing that out there, but would you look at, like I've kind of tried to say, I have said on many shows, it's like you look at Coast to Coast AM, you look at the people that they've brought on, interspersed with these, great UFO researchers and abduction researchers, and yet, you've got, Roger Stone, you've got the head of the Oath Keepers. I mean, I don't want to get too political here, but to me it's like you're intermixing all of this in the conspiracy theory, and then you've got this great cesspool to push thought in a certain direction, and I think that is exactly what's happening, and I think that's pretty sad.
Roger Stone appeared on Coast to Coast. Mm-hmm. Not a listener. Oh, good Lord. Here's another dangerous character. When I started to write about him under another name, I was, I got some pretty interesting information. I mean, two guys who knew Roger Stone back when he was very, very young, he basically told me that he was absolutely horribly mean to gay people. He would make there was a gay student in the high school he went to, and he made his life miserable. And
that's something to be proud of.
Then in the 1972 election, Roger Stone set up the Gays for McGovern committee purely in order to slam McGovern, because in 1972, that was, I can recall those days. Yeah, that was a way to make, to kind of smear McGovern, although it didn't really do anything But yeah, that's the kind of trickery that Roger Stone gets up to. Again, I'd like to be able to talk about him. What the hell was he doing on Coast to Coast? Was he
Well,
pushing?
I mean, not and like I said, not only was he on, and I think more than once he was on, the head of the Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, who was now in a bit of trouble, uh, which he should be, and then also Michael Flynn has also been on Coast to Coast. So if you go back, and that's the interesting thing, it's like we want to say, and I believe, when you're really studying the phenomenon, it should not have anything to do with politics, but we are so naive to think this whole subject doesn't have to do with politics. And from, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we need to really look at that and study how this subject can be manipulated to manipulate minds, to change ideas, and to move people forward in a direction that isn't necessarily the best for our society. And for the, like I said, for the fact that we've got people that are stroking white supremacist egos and supporting some of the things that are taking place in the UFO community, and other people aren't asking questions about that. I think that I think that says a lot about those people's characters, in my opinion. So,
Well, there's a long-standing connection between fascism and flying saucers. I got into that a little bit in Controllers, even though I don't even know why I included that material in that monograph. It was just something that was really kind of sticking in my craw, and I had noticed it, and I said, "This has got to mean something." And again, I've mentioned that before. The George Hunt Williamson's connection to the way he would insert old-fashioned anti-Semitic ideology into the burgeoning flying saucer subculture of the 1950s. And plus the fact that those guys were just also scam artists, and grifters. There was Aaron Gulius is going into that to a great extent, but somebody should try to understand just what was it about these grifters that attracted them to the field, because there wasn't a whole lot of money to be made. And yet there was scam artist after scam artist. I mean, I guess George Adamski made money from it, but the others, they didn't. And yet nothing could stop them from appearing at these conferences and telling their wild stories. There was an enormous overlap between, Forteanism of that time. And, again, I may have spoken about that earlier. The head of the International Fortean Society in the 1940s was Tiffany Thayer, who was, if not a stone cold fascist, was certainly fascist friendly. And he was one of the first to purvey, conspiracy theories that FDR knew ahead of time that the Pearl Harbor attack was coming. And he was really doing his best to undermine the war effort. And there were definite connections between William Dudley Pelley, the American fascist, and George Hunt Williamson back in the day. So somebody should, and that has continued to this very day.
Right.
By no means am I saying that everybody involved with ufology is a right winger or a far right winger or anything like that. And for that matter, I have nothing against right wingers, like normal right wingers, the kind of people who voted for Ronald Reagan back in 1980 and 84. That's fine. I don't care. But there's a sector of the right that is far more extreme than that.
And I think, and like I've said before, I mean, I was a Republican delegate, I mean, I'm just like, I used to believe there were good people all across the board, and I still, I mean, some of my leanings are, I'm kind of mixed both ways, but I think it has been really frightening to see the way things have been, the path that we've gone down, and the fact that we can't engage with people and have a rational dialogue. And to me, looking at the UFO narrative over the decades is troubling. When you look at the people that have been the leaders of of all of this and promoting, like we've talked about on the last show, promoting their narratives, and there's always some agenda there. And I mentioned this on multiple shows because it was so disturbing to me, but I was speaking at a conference and Jordan Sather was there, and he was kind of this new kid on the block on YouTube, good looking, just new age, kind of talking about a healthy lifestyle and all of these things. And then he was kind of surrounded by Corey Good's team of people, and then Corey Good, that's a whole other issue.
He's the secret space program guy, right?
He's yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you've got that whole crew that is surrounding this new YouTuber, and hey, why don't you promote our stuff? And I was at a conference with Craig Lang, who's passed away. He was a member of the MUFON ERT team and a dear friend of mine. I loved Craig. And we were sitting there at the back watching Jordan's presentation, and it was a beautiful, beautiful PowerPoint. Clearly I can't even turn off the mute, but on my program, but you've got these beautiful slides, black and white, black and white, black and white. And then 10 slides in, you've got a slide of all these people in a crowd, and in color is the Nazi flag. And, it's just like, whoa, it doesn't get more, hit you in the head, obvious than that. And then 5 slides after that, there was a beautiful, well, I don't know if you can say beautiful photo, you really can't, but a very distinguished photo of Adolf Hitler and a quote from him, with regard to his, love of the occult and things. And I just sat there going, are you freaking kidding me? I literally had to get up and leave. And I thought that was so, it's like, how can we sit here and we think that we're so, new agey, and we're communicating with benevolent beings, and we are so evolved. And yet this is the crap we're listening to. And this is what we're promoting. And we don't even have the emotional intelligence to ask what is going on here. And I think that should be a pretty harsh statement about a majority of the people in the UFO community who don't have enough integrity to ask why people that are promoting things, paying for conferences, are supporting ideas that are less than benevolent, in my opinion.
So how can we continue? I still remain fascinated by high strangeness cases. I don't have any conclusions about them. All I can say is they're very interesting. And I am not the sort to dismiss immediately what the witnesses are saying. How can we pursue the research without giving any fuel to that fire?
That is a great question. And that's something that I'm trying to deal with, because and I think it's important to, it's like once you have a landscape, you've got a map of these, this is what is going on over here. These are the players involved. These are the people that are talking about religion and UFOs and yada, 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 all this stuff. And then you can say, okay, I'm going to steer clear of that crowd because the information they're giving me is clearly there's an agenda there. And then, I don't know, perhaps go out and find a place, talk to people in a community, do research, go out and do field research, do your own thing. I think that's, what else can you do?
Well, I don't know. I just warned the youngsters. Speaking of which, there's a podcaster I kind of got in contact with behind the scenes named Zelia Edgar. Do you know her?
No.
No, just another tinfoil hat.
Oh, you've told me about her. Yeah,
you should have her on the show. She came out with a new book, and she's young, and she's cute as a button. And God, I remember the first time I saw her show, her podcast, her video cast, and she was talking about an old John Keel case, and I remember thinking, oh, she is so well spoken. God, I'd be so proud if that girl were my daughter. And then my second thought was, wow, I saw a cute girl on YouTube. And my first thought was, I'd be so proud if she were my daughter. It seemed like only yesterday I'd see a cute girl on YouTube, and my first thought would be something entirely different.
Time flies.
Yes, it does. It does. But I have to say that what I liked about her was that she was well spoken, she was open minded, but she wasn't silly about it. She didn't really seem to have beliefs. She did the research, and she went to old newspapers that nobody knew existed, and she would, I corresponded with her about an unusual case in Oregon that was mentioned in one of John Keel's books, and she had the news clips. She did her research. It was like, yeah, that's how it should be done.
That is cool. That's great.
Right. And so that's why I think she should be on your show one of these days. But the thing I like best is there's no politics. It's all high strangeness. It's all.
Okay, what are you trying to say about my show then?
No, I'm saying that maybe I'm the one who ruined it all, because I came in there and I brought politics into it back in 1989,
right,
when absolutely everybody was just listening to Bud Hopkins and saying, "Oh, it's all aliens," and of course, the Roswell imbroglio, came to light at that time as well, and inevitably that had a political tinge to it. But yeah, I was one of the people who insisted back then that no, we've got to get political. We can't just we can't just we can't just be fanciful. We can't just think how groovy it is to think of all these unusual possibilities. I insisted that we politicize everything. Folks, I'm sorry. I apologize. It was so much more fun before.
Oh, well, trust me, and I know, and that's the thing, that I've talked about so many times. It's like it was so much more fun for me when I could go up to the gates of Skinwalker Ranch and think, holy crap! I mean, there might be some hot, hairy beast behind those gates. Ooh. I mean, be still my beating heart. And little did I know, nope, that beast was not hot and hairy. I mean, maybe hairy, but not hot. But and so it's like it was just so much. I mean, life was a lot healthier. I mean, I think, at least for me, because I've obviously been, I've been through the ringer with regard to Skinwalker Ranch and some of these con artists that have come in and out of my life and things, but still, I feel like there's an obligation for us to talk about this, because there are younger people that are coming into the subject. They don't have a clue about some of the levels that these people and groups will go to create a false narrative and to promote their agendas. And I think that's an important thing to talk about, as well as talking about getting out and looking up at the sky and exploring the unknown. And so perhaps I will find my balance there, but I don't know. Right now, I'm on a roll.
Well, like I said, I just damned myself. Coming out and saying, yeah, this whole thing was a lot more fun before I came along.
Well, no, but
it's true,
I think for a lot of people that go through that discovery process, when you've got people that have been in the subject for 50 years and they're sitting back there going, oh my gosh, I just spent my whole life researching a subject I'm never going to know the answer to. And, you've got these younger people that are coming onto the scene and taking credit for their work and all of these things. And so I think it's a trip. It's a discovery process. And how do you fare each year as you learn more and more about things? And are you going to be one of those researchers or people that simply enjoys it because you want to be part of like the Mary Kay Cosmetics Club for men? You sit around and you barbecue and you talk about, your, experiences. And not that I'm dissing Mary Kay, but I mean, it's, there's that kind of, okay, do we want to tell stories? Do we want to have a social club? Do we want to understand that we should be open to an incredible and important discovery process and say that where I am or where I was 5 years ago isn't where I'm going to be, and take it on the chin and say I made a mistake? or are you going to live and die on a hill of a belief system that at the end of the day can't be proven? You know, what's the end goal?
I don't know. I guess part of it is we have to find out what, if politics really is going to be part of this from now on, and it looks like that's the case. And really, I mean, I just played a minor role, but probably the person who did the most to insert politics into Forteana was Bill Cooper. Well,
can you
what
talk a
what
little
was Betty
bit?
Davis's great line? Of the dead speak only good. Bill Cooper is dead. Good.
Let me talk a little bit about 40 and, about that and Bill Cooper. I know that we've touched on that a little bit before, but tell us a little bit more.
Oh, he and I had words. I got a couple of death threats from him, but I mean, that's just Bill Cooper's way of saying hello. I just thought that he was. What was continually stunning to me is that he was caught in lie after lie, and he just would not give up. Now, was that a cunning strategy on his part? Or did he, on some level, actually convince himself of what he was saying? Excuse me. I've met people who I felt knew that they were lying. I'll mention a name, Virgil Posty Armstrong. I went on one of his sky watches in the California desert fairly early on. It was hilarious. He was a great showman. I did not believe a word he said. And I don't believe that he believed a word he said. He was there to give a show. Bill Cooper was on a different level. When he got into it, he really seemed to be possessed by the spirit. And I think I've mentioned this before. Roller. It's like Joseph Smith. It's like L. Ron Hubbard. Any number of other cult leaders you could name. On some level, they really seem to believe it. I mean, L. Ron Hubbard, I've spoken to people who said that he was basically two different characters. When he was speaking to, his followers in Scientology and making up, this elaborate mythos, on some level, he was really, really into it. And you could tell that he, that he found it credible. He found his own lies credible. But at the same time, he could go to a science fiction convention in the 1950s and say, I scammed the suckers. And I know that he was doing that because I've met people who heard him. Ted Sturgeon, I may have mentioned this before, was a good friend of my family. I heard stories about, when I was a boy, I heard stories about L. Ron Hubbard from Sturgeon. I've never understood this mentality. I will say that Bill Cooper was a liar that I would place in the same category with Joe Smith and Ron Hubbard. Ooh. He really seemed to believe his own lies. And that's scary. But even scarier was that people rationalized. They rationalized the lies. And I tried to talk people out of Cooperism. I could tell long stories, but it's not worth it. Saying, well, he lied about this. He lied about the Dulce base, and he's, it was this fake story that he involved in his narrative, and there were all these things that happened after 1972 that he was including in his memories of the document that he read in the year 1972. How can you believe this? It's obvious, but people I've talked to always had ways to rationalize it.
Well, it is interesting, and I just have to say there was a chat or a comment in chat just saying it's dicey to call Joseph Smith's operation a cult in Utah, which I would agree. Absolutely. And
well, let us say that before it reached Utah, it was considered a cult at that time in, say, the 1830s. Is that fair?
I would agree with that. And moving on to the next subject. Oh, I don't know. And I want to just say that people are talking about Skinwalker Ranch and some of the things that are going on in or around that area, and I want to just kind of throw out there. I think whatever's happening at Skinwalker Ranch is as we know. I think it's absolute crap. Anyway, so I just needed to say that. So I think there are a lot of other incredible places on the planet that we have a lot of. We could do a lot of exploration, and I think that Skinwalker Ranch is just a myth that has been promoted by UFO charlatans for decades. So that's just me. I would definitely say run away from Skinwalker Ranch.
Well, you were on the Skinwalker Ranch, right?
I was, yes, I was, and I've been around there, and like I said, been collecting cases and different things, or interviewing people for a long time, and looking at politics and land deals and all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the Uinta Basin, and at the end of the day, I'm not quite sure what it has to do with anything paranormal. I mean, I think that it's there could be paranormal things happening all over. You know, I mean, like I said, I've witnessed some things. I can't explain, but I think at the end of the day, when you look at all the facts presented about Skinwalker Ranch, if you can actually say there's anything of merit, especially when you ask people that are supposed to be transparent with data that have not been, you've got a problem there.
Well, I mean, when you were there, you personally didn't see anything paranormal. Did you see? Did you see the kind of scientific operation that everybody has bragged about or whispered about all these years?
No, I saw, let's see, a fake security camera. I've seen and have videos. I can't wait to put this out, but of security guards that were paid thanks to our $22 million in tax funds to study the paranormal at Skinwalker Ranch, that spent more time in the bathroom with a GoPro on their head, putting blackface makeup on and donning their ghillie suit to go out and hide in the bushes to scare people. That's the level of scientific research I saw out there. I mean, it's, that was back in the Bigelow days. Maybe, I guess some of the cameras and a fish tank that was put up on top of a power line that had a few kids' toys in it. I guess that was some sort of a great way to communicate with whatever it is, because I'm sure whatever it was would definitely want to climb a power pole and look in a fish tank and play with kids' toys. I mean, and honestly, it's like you just think, what? I don't know. It's fascinating. I mean, I've looked at thousands of pictures of the property, and there's no evidence of them ever doing a scientific study. There is evidence of them making up stories and making money off of a good story, and then talking about dino beavers and security guards, getting really bored and loaded and probably making big tracks of whatever in the snow. Oh, I'm saying too much.
Well, we can speak about that later. Right now, I think of Skinwalker Ranch like as if it were the Winchester Mystery House. I had a friend who fancied herself as having psychic powers, and she often said that I went to the Winchester Mystery House, and as far as I'm concerned, that's the least haunted house I've ever been to. She just didn't get any vibes. And I kind of understand where she's talking about. It's architecturally interesting, but I didn't see any, I didn't get any weird feelings from it. At the same time, Skinwalker Ranch looks like the least paranormal haunted ranch in the United States right now.
I would say it really is, and I think it's really interesting because you look at some of the photos that I've seen taken by many different people on the ranch. And it's just a ranch. It's, and then you've got like some dilapidated buildings where, you have the cult favorite hit, Hunt for Skinwalker, where you've got a really important piece of, film history with Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp and oh my gosh, who was that little British boy who really showed up in the Skinwalker movie? Help me out here, people. That Robbie Williams, they're sitting around and talking about drinking beers and smoking cigarettes, and you've got this view of Jeremy Corbell's crotch, and it's like this is the most important thing that's taking place at Skinwalker Ranch. And yes, I think that kind of summed it up. Yeah. So, anyway. Thank you for letting me say that. But it's, again, like I think it's a stage. It's a old Western movie kind of a scene. You know what I mean? It's like we're staging things, we're putting things here and there. Oh, look over the fence. We've got a bunch of dead bones that are mysteriously dropped there, and then hides that are hanging on a fence. And, you put a little spin on things, and look what you've got 3 decades later.
Well, there seems to be some sort of push to promote these allegedly haunted locations, which I don't see any evidence. And I'm not saying that haunted locations do not exist. I could name a few that are at least interesting based on the stories I've heard. This Hellier thing, I watched the first season of that, and it began interestingly, and it just went, as the thing went on and on, I was like, yeah, where's the evidence? Is there anything? Are we going to get anything to chew on here? I mean, this wouldn't even rate 2 paragraphs in a John Keel book, and yet people keep going on, and that show has been going on for season after season, I understand, and what is the attraction? Have you seen anything there that actually had some meat, on the bones?
I haven't actually watched it, but maybe tonight's the night.
Oh my God. I mean, it was of interest to me because I took some interest back in the day into the mystery of who is Terry Wrist, who was this alleged correspondence of T. Allen Greenfield, the Tau Allen Greenfield. He is he was a bishop in the Gnostic Church, but the version of the Gnostic Church that was actually associated with Aleister Crowley's OTO. I did a little research into all of this, and he wrote some occult books in the 1990s, and he started to promote this fellow named Terry Wrist, who was supposedly this this person who was, who was a magus. He knew all these secrets of the ancient world. And Terry Wrist was the one who led the Hellier crew down that path to nowhere, nowhere interesting, because he was getting in contact with those people and sending them, messages. Frankly, I thought that Terry Wrist was another name for Timothy Green Beckley, because I just thought he was a big scammer. And when you say the word big scammer to me, one of the first names that comes to mind is Timothy Green Beckley. Apparently that's not it. So I've gotten into it behind the scenes with a few other people, like, who was this Terry Wrist? And I have some ideas. I wouldn't trust what Greenfield has to say. I think his books are interesting. Definitely worth reading. But, he wants to, he thinks that people should go to these allegedly haunted locations and perform these really woo-woo, psychic occult ceremonies in order to contact the powers beyond. And I'm saying, no, that's not a way to get information. That is not the way to do science. That's not the way to, to actually get proof. And so, I don't know. Is that what it's come to these days? Is anybody going to go out there and actually try to get evidence?
I don't know. Maybe we should plan a trip. That could
Anyways,
be scary.
well, the Polonius of the Paranormal set has managed to blather on for quite some time, and
I
I did
love
not
it.
even get to any of the material that I had prepared for the last time I was on this program, but it
What?
really would work best as an adjunct to the work of David Brewer and his wonderful book No Return, which is about the Jerry Irwin story, because that is the one alleged abduction story which definitely ties, and it goes back to the 1950s, and it definitely ties into the UFO, to the controller's hypothesis. And as I've mentioned before, Brewer wrote that without even knowing who I am, and he found this evidence completely independently. One of these days, when he's in a better position technically, because right now he's away from home, I hope you could have him on the show. And if you'd be kind enough to allow me back on, I'd like to talk about these other cases from the 1950s,
I would love that.
which I feel parallel David's work, which I feel are perhaps related to the Jerry Irwin story, because I think that there was more than one airman, Air Force enlistee, who was or officer who was actually subjected to this kind of treatment back then. I am much more likely to believe the cases, these classic cases from that period of history, than I am some of these people who have come out since then.
Like
And
who
maybe
specifically? Who
that's
can you
small
think
of me.
of that's who can you think of now that you wouldn't necessarily hang your hat on?
Oh, I wouldn't want to. Well, frankly, just a lot of the key people that I was talking to. Some of them were so. Again, I saw some indications of people. There were some people whose behavior was a little bit too odd for me to consider them credible witnesses. Is that a nice way to put it? Also, in the 1990s, I took a great interest in the satanic ritual abuse allegations, and oh boy, did I get burned there. I mean, the people kept, that's a world where they refer to the abusers and they name the abusers as the perps. And you have to agree. You have to say, yes, that person is a perpetrator. That person is a child abuser. That person is a perpetrator. That person has done horrible things. And unless you use that language, unless you're willing to take that kind of legal risk, then these claimants would point the finger at me and say, you're part of the problem. You're part of the conspiracy. God help anybody who gets involved in that morass. And of course, in the 1990s, there was a remarkably robust underground network of people who claimed to be MK Ultra victims. To an extent, I helped to get that started. And on another occasion, perhaps I will tell some stories about the people I met there. I came to disbelieve them, or rather, I reached the point where I couldn't absolutely dismiss them, but I never got anything probative.
But isn't that? I mean, it's so there could be something to the UFO phenomenon. There could be something to people that are targeted individuals. And that's such a, I mean, there's so many questions. I mean, you look at the technologies we've developed, and you mentioned in the controllers, and you look at Jose Delgado and, Lily and yada, 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 all, I mean, and you look at what is coming forward now about Havana syndrome and things that we are, I mean, that we're using that in battle, using different technologies. So it's where do we test that? Where I know that there have been, in fact, I need to go back and find this quote, but there was somebody in a high-ranking military official that said, of course, we're going to be testing this in a real life scenario, and we're going to be testing this in all likelihood, at home. And we've seen what we have done in the name of testing
But
on
how
our own
can you?
citizens. So
I know, but I mean, when you're researching that, how can you dismiss the possibility that these are people with psychological issues? That was the stumper for me.
right.
That was, I mean, I know that we're near the end of our time. Do I have enough time to mention this? I never thought I would go over the 2 hours, but apparently we did.
Stick with me. It
Okay.
happens.
One of the things that led me to believe to kind of disavow my own hypothesis was, do you remember it was mentioned in Bud Hopkins's first book? Towards the end, it was very, very offhand. He said that he found it very suspicious that many of the women who came to him with abduction stories also suffered from a mysterious, to him it was mysterious, condition known as endometriosis. Now, Bud Hopkins used to say that in his lectures. He stopped talking about it. And he didn't put endometriosis into his subsequent books, but I'm pretty sure that it's in Intruders, and if not there, then somewhere it's in Missing Time. Mm-hmm. And I know that he would talk about this in lectures, that this kept coming up with the women that he was talking to. Now, Bud's belief was that the aliens were basically doing oh, hello there. What's his name again?
Tinker. And then here's Honey. This is getting to the time where they're just like, Mom, we've been sitting over here. Seriously.
All right. Well, let me finish this. Bud's belief was that the aliens were basically experimenting on women's reproductive organs, and that this experimentation was the reason why these women had developed this disease. I've met some women with that condition. They were not UFO abductees. They were in a great deal of pain. And your heart goes out to them, because it's something I will never know, obviously. And I feel horrible for them, because they're undergoing something extremely stressful, and it does affect their condition mentally. But what Bud Hopkins never revealed to his audience was that endometriosis can have psychological effects. On some women, it could lead to a borderline personality disorder. Not only that, there's a factor that nobody wants to talk about. Endometriosis is so painful that a lot of women secretly self-medicate. They seek out drugs and they take drugs. I can't blame them. It's a painful condition.
It is. I've known many women that have had that, and it is very sad and very heartbreaking to see how much pain they're in, and it's so.
Again, I don't want anybody out there to think that I'm being, overly skeptical, or, that I'm taking a callous attitude towards what these women have been through. All I'm saying is that these women have a physical disease which can have severe psychological impact.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean,
and they can turn into secret drug takers.
No, I think that's, I don't know.
Am I really out of line by saying that perhaps this affects their credibility when they come forward with a difficult story?
I think maybe that the endometriosis thing and then the credibility thing is, maybe stretching that a bit, because I know a lot of people then, that are my friends and family members that have had that are very credible people, and so I would definitely say,
the women I've known, who've had it, I would never say that they were liars. I would definitely think that they should be able to testify in open court and that they would be believed about anything. They were honest people, and they were not crazy. Nevertheless, is that true of everybody who has that condition and who might be taking drugs in order to alleviate the pain?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that, I don't know. We'll have to talk about this. We'll talk about this. But
it's a difficult subject to talk about, and I understand how you would, how you might cringe. But at the same time, Bud Hopkins brought it up, and I know that this is a factor with some abductees. Must we leap to the conclusion that aliens did it? Maybe the condition is what created the aliens.
But, we also can't dismiss, we also can't say that a woman that has endometriosis is, prone to self-medicating, and therefore they're making up a story. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't know. I'm watching this show, House. I know everybody got there before me. I'm catching up with it years after the fact. But he often says everybody lies, and he's this doctor who diagnoses people, and he's an incredible cynic. I'm not that cynical, but how do we know that these women who were talking to Bud Hopkins weren't lying about the drugs they were taking?
How do we know Bud Hopkins wasn't lying about everything he was saying?
I don't think he was.
I mean, you know what I mean? It is just there's so many questions. I don't know. So, but anyway, I really thank you for coming on the show again, and clearly,
Very last minute, honest.
I
folks,
know
I had
last
nothing
minute you were
prepared.
totally rocked it out, and I'm so grateful because there were the great nuggets, and I mean, there's so much more to talk about, and I appreciate your willingness to come on, to begin with the first time because you haven't done this, for 2 decades, and so it's my pleasure to have you on, and I've gotten a great feedback, and I want to say for people that you should definitely go out and get The Child Stealers, Phantom Social Workers, An American Mystery by Martin Cannon. So you can find that on Amazon. And then Martin, I look forward to having you back again and talking with you. And so, and again, thank you for all the people in chat who have donated to the show tonight. Steve, I know you got on a little bit late, but just thank you very much to all of you have done that. I love seeing new people in chat. And like I always say, the people in the chat room for UFO Classified are asking some of the best questions that I see anywhere. And I appreciate the level of education that you have and the seriousness with which you take this. And every once in a while, we can have a little fun and talk about dreams and, different things. John Alexander, stuff like that. That was really funny. He'd probably get a kick out of that dream. But anyway, thank you for being here. And I want to thank all of you so much. Amy, you guys, everybody, UFO lover, have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Stay safe. And Martin, I will talk to you this weekend.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You guys take care. And then hopefully I'll actually roll the outro. So see you guys. Good night. Thanks, Mario.